Okay, Christina, it's all yours.
Sounds great. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here today. I hope everyone is safe, healthy, and hopefully watching this Lunch and Learn from home, as I know we're all doing our part to social distance ourselves. PANO is very excited to be here with Stephen Shattuck and Bloomerang's co-founder and chief relationship officer, Jay Love. This is my first time meeting Jay, and I know I can't see you, but hi, Jay. We're so excited you are willing to do this during a crazy time like this. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, Christina. We're really, truly looking forward to it.
Yes, yes. So Jay will be giving us the lowdown on how even some of our smaller nonprofits can incorporate major gift fundraising into their development plans. Before we get into any of that, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to the whole team over at Bloomerang, who's always incredibly responsive, they're thoughtful, they're professional, and not to mention fun to work with. If you guys haven't seen their COVID-19 resources page, I would check it out. It is linked from PANO's website as well. And not only do they have really awesome resources there, but as we were just discussing earlier, they've even made a downloadable coloring book to get us all through this very weird time we find ourselves in. And it's things like that that, you know, just they embody so much of what we value here at PANO in terms of breaking out of silos, being creative, figuring out how we can all be the best versions of ourselves to do more in our communities, which ultimately is our mission at PANO. We exist to amplify the impact of the work that all of you are doing out in the field as our member nonprofits. And we know that for many nonprofits, especially a lot of the smaller shops, major gift fundraising can feel like one of those rainy day projects, you know, one of those things we will get to once we wrap up our gala, once we hire another staff person, maybe even once we figure out who that month-old takeout in the fridge belongs to. I know we've all been there before. But one of the many reasons that we love having Bloomerang as a partner is that not only do they offer a very user-friendly donor management and fundraising database to help make your development jobs easier, but they also offer the education to help nonprofits understand the tools, the resources, and the skills they need to maximize, or we need to maximize our donor databases. What's even better is that webinars like today's are completely free. And in case you weren't aware, any PANO members on the call do have access to a 10% discount off of Bloomerang services. So for more information about that discount, about becoming a PANO member, any of our other upcoming trainings, any of those COVID-19 resources, you can always visit our website, pano.org. So thanks again, Jay, for your partnership, for your expertise. And on that note, I'm going to turn things back over to you guys.
Well, thank you. I deeply appreciate that, Christina. We look forward to it. As we said, you feel free to use the chat function for any questions that come up. We'll save some time at the end for an overall Q&A period, but Stephen is going to be monitoring that and present a few of those questions as we go along if they're pertinent to where we are. Today, we're going to be exploring major gift fundraising for small shops with a few adaptations of how you can go about this in a remote version. Where you're not able to have as many face-to-face meetings, which we often think of as being a key part of major gift fundraising. So just a little bit more about myself and gives me a chance to show a few of my grandchildren here. This is my 39th year of working with nonprofits. I've helped with probably 20,000 or more database installations and have been involved with 2 or 3 of the key players in this sector. One of the key things that I think has made a big difference in my life was about 10 years in, roughly, 29 years ago, my wife looked at me and said, you're basing your career off the nonprofit world, maybe you should start giving back in many different ways. And I can proudly say now that I've been on the board of over 25 local and national nonprofits, currently serve on the board of a living history museum. I currently serve, I'm the former chairman of the AFP Ethics Committee, now serve on the committee itself. Currently on the board of the Rugari Research Institute, which assisted with some of this research. The Innovation Fund at Butler University and some other institutions, and had the good pleasure of serving as the co-chair of the YMCA Capital Campaign with my wife. And you see Christy listed there. One of the key things that she introduced to me, she served as the executive director for the 4th largest public school foundation in the state of Indiana. So we had both an endowment and a capital campaign that took place as part of her work also. So this major gift process has been a major part of our life the last 20 years in various forms. The question that we were trying to answer with this research, and you'll get a chance to see where you can download the entire research paper for this. This was conducted about 3.5 years ago, but it's still pretty pertinent to today, was can small and mid-sized nonprofits really raise major gifts? And Dr. Adrian Sargent was the main person that was behind this research, wanting to get the answer. He also worked with Amy Eisenstein. Some of you may be familiar with some of her work on major gifts that was involved with this, and Dr. Rita Cotter. The three of them worked together to create the Mastering Major Gift Fundraising Report. The entire 70-some page report is downloadable at the URL that you see there, masteringmajorgifts.com/report. I would encourage you after the session today to take a look at that. It goes a little bit deeper into some of the findings. For those of you that are a bit of a statistical nerds like myself, you'll love to know the exact standard deviation on all this data and stuff that I'll be presenting. And all of those findings are listed there, as well as several additional comments that we won't be able to get a chance to dive into today. I want to thank the lead sponsors. When the Institute came to us and said that they would like to do this research, Bloomerang was the lead sponsor of this project. We also worked with a prospect research company that we partner with by the name of Donor Search, and also the Support Center, the Partnership in Philanthropy that covers the New York and New Jersey area. They were delightful to come in and make up the final amount of funding to make this project come to life about 3.5 years ago. So to give you an idea, we started off with about 1,100 nonprofits participating. For one reason or another, we were able to use 662 nonprofits with operating budgets of 10 million or less. You'll see we break the report into 3 groupings: under $1 million, 1 million to 5, and 5 to 10 million. And as you know from the layout of the nonprofits that we have throughout the United States, 10 million and less actually comprises 96% of all the operating nonprofits in the country. And I know as a large portion of the PANO membership. So we are delighted that this is a perfect fit for the PANO membership as we're presenting the findings here today. This was how the respondents broke out by budget size. We had about 50% of the participants that were under 1 million in revenue size, about 35% 1 to 4.9, and about 14% that were above 5 million. So you'll continually see me breaking it into these different 3 groupings, or each of these categories, as we present the data. So you can sort of plug yourself in to know how many staff members are involved with major gifts, how they use volunteers, how the major gift solicitation cycle differs between these 3 groups. Now, how did the respondents rate by category? Our largest group was human services. The next largest group was education, then arts and culture and health services and medical research combined for the third group there, third and fourth. We had nature and environmental, religious and spiritual, and as you can see right down through the rest of the groups there. So a really nice, broad spattering of different types of nonprofits that participated in the research for that, and they were really spread throughout the entire United States as part of our research. So let me jump into the findings here. Where does major gifts fall for most of these organizations? As you can see, major gifts was a solid 4th place as far as funding for nonprofits. Events, direct mail, and grants from foundation all pretty much tied there in the first 3 spots, with right around 18 to 19% of the average nonprofit's funding. Next was major gifts, grants from government, corporate fundraising, digital fundraising and peer-to-peer activities, bequests and plan giving, United Way, and then 5.2% in the other. So as you can see, even for these size nonprofits, major gifts is a very critical part of our funding going forward. And in this time of crisis where we may not be able to have as many fundraising events without turning them into virtual events, the role of major gift fundraising may be even more important as we move forward throughout the rest of 2020. So let's define a major gift. For that, the groups that were under $1 million, to them, a major gift meant a gift of $1,000 or more. The median group, the middle group, the 1 to 5 million, essentially, was a $5,000 gift. And then in the larger group, above 5 million in revenue, they didn't really classify it as a major gift until we were approaching nearly 25,000 in annual revenue. So you can sort of see how this comes into play, and how this is something that you can sort of align with how you're considering a major gift in your own organization. For that, the number of fundraisers engaged in major gift works, as you can see, as we move up in size, the under 1 million had essentially 2.1 individuals engaged in fundraising, but only 1/3 of an individual's time was being spent in what we would consider major gift work on a week-to-week basis. The 1 to 4 million had 2.5, or 1 to 5 million had 2.5 individuals working in fundraising in their office. Only about a half a person's time was spent there. And then even as we went up to the 5 to 10 million, you'll see that the net results there were based upon the time of just slightly less than one full-time person being devoted to major gift fundraising. The volunteers is where we make up some of the available time to be able to make major gifts come to life. As you can see, even though we only had about 1/3 of a person's time there, in the bottom two categories, we had about 4.5 volunteers that were engaged in some way, shape, or form in the major gift process. The report itself goes into more detail about how these volunteers were used. And the larger group had 5.3, but then you can see of their time that they spent working with the nonprofit, once again, less than a half a person was actually spent strictly on major gift work. So we'll see how that plays out as we take a look at the results of the report here. So how did these organizations perform? I first presented this about 3 years ago at the Minnesota Association of Nonprofits at their event held in Minneapolis. And I remember a young lady coming up to me that was brand new to fundraising, brand new to working at a nonprofit. And she had been wrestling with setting her goals for the year with her board and with the chief executive of the organization. And she said, "This now gives me the clarity for this, because although they were a startup organization well under $1 million, they were setting her goal at $500,000 in major gifts, which was going to be virtually impossible to achieve." As you can see here, for most organizations under $1 million, the total amount of major gift revenue was just under $94,000 that came in during the course of a 1-year period. The $1 to $5 million organizations had quite a nice increase up to over $400,000. And that came from 43 gifts. The smaller group had about 25 gifts that made up the 94,000. And then as we move up in the $5 to $10 million category, there was about 1.2 million in major gift revenue that came from 146 gifts. So you can sort of see what the amount raised per staff member was, and then you can sort of do the math to figure out what the average gift amount was for each of their major gifts. Stephen, I'm going to pause for a minute, take a drink of water here. Are there any questions that have arisen so far?
Yeah, we had one clarifying question from Matthew. Matthew, we are defining major gifts pretty broadly. There were separate definitions of major gifts, so they sort of left it up to each cohort to define. Is that right, Jay? So
yes, they did.
Organizations may have said 1,000 is major to us, but for maybe a higher ed institution or a hospital, it would have been something in the 5 figures.
Right. Yeah. And that, as you could see, the average is sort of aligned into those 3 revenue groupings so that we can sort of assume that 1,000 for the one group, 5,000, and then nearly 25,000 for the largest group. So thank you. Any other quick questions before we continue on?
No, I think we're good, Jay.
All right, good. Now, as we start talking about some of the best practices that come into play, the goal anytime I do a webinar like this or a face-to-face session at a conference at all is we're hoping that for 3 to 4 takeaways that each of you can come up with 3 or 4 items you jot down that you can put into practice throughout the rest of this calendar year. So this is one of the areas that I think you may find to be important is how large of a pipeline, how many people do you need to be working with consciously to be prepared to solicit a major gift from them. In the under $1 million category, they had 14 people that they were in the process of cultivating for their first gift, and they had 17 that they were contemplating for a second or subsequent gift. You'll see that for most organizations, the major gift does not come until the 4th or 5th year of giving by your donors. So usually the number of people that you're soliciting for a major gift that's their a later gift, later than something after their first gift, is a much larger number in most situations. You can see as we move up to the 1 to 5 million, they had 33 people they were working with as active prospects, and that were first-time donors, 45 that were repeat donors. And then the gap was even bigger up in the 5 to 10 million. As you can see, they had somewhere around 83 total prospects they were working with, 30 of them for a first-time gift and 52 to 53 for multiple gifts. Usually when I'm in a room like this, I'll ask people that are working in the university environment or a national nonprofit where they actually have major gift officers. And the average number of people that are assigned to a major gift officer at a university or a national nonprofit such as the Nature Conservancy or the American Cancer Society, they usually have somewhere between 100 and 150 assigned prospects. And that will be a mix of people they're talking to about a first-time gift, but the larger group will be the people that have already been giving, and then they're trying to work them into a major gift on one of their subsequent gifts. So compare this to your pipelines, and so you get a little bit of an idea. Now, if you're a fairly new startup, you're not going to reach these numbers until somewhere between your 3rd and 5th year. So keep that in mind, that it takes 3 to 5 years of giving to start building up a major gift pipeline. So some correlations, some things that we want to think about. Focusing in on just first-time gifts for major gift fundraising will negatively impact performance. Our suggestions are to make sure that you concentrate on people that have been giving to your organizations 5 or more years. Doesn't necessarily have to be consecutively, but that does help. And bear in mind that it usually will take 12 to 18 touches to build a relationship before that major gift ask is coming about. Now, what are touches, particularly in this virtual world and non-face-to-face contact world we're in right now? That is anything that's personalized for that. So it can be an email that's personalized, obviously a phone call, obviously a Zoom or a GoToMeeting discussion that you have with somebody, something that you mail out that you perhaps have a Post-it note on or a handwritten note on. Anything that personalizes that interaction with somebody contemplates or counts as a touch. We're going to have to be working for several months now, it seems, or at least a few months, without face-to-face events and things of that nature for these touches to happen. So we'll have to go about it in different ways. But bear in mind that the people that have been giving to your organizations multiple years in a row are looking forward to hearing from you. I've had good fortune of being a major gift donor to numerous organizations that I've been on the board of, or my wife's been on the board of, and all of them have reached out to my wife or myself or both of us on a personal basis to talk to us about where their needs are and how things are changing as this year unfolds. One of the other things that we found as we looked at this, that few organizations track long-term values such as donor satisfaction or commitment. Now, there's a couple easy ways we can fix this. Most nonprofits right now in their fundraising departments and their communications and marketing departments are not doing any sort of form of donor survey. And this is quite a bit different than the commercial world. If you think about it, the commercial world, if you buy a car or truck or an appliance or even have an interaction online with a vendor, you're going to get a survey almost immediately or within a week or less about that interaction, asking you about that. But yet in the nonprofit world, we very seldom do proper surveys. So our recommendations that you can make a difference here and find out who are your most satisfied and highly content donors that you have is some sort of a very brief 1 or 2 question new donor survey within the first 3 months. When I say brief there, we're just asking what is their preferred form of communication. And the second most important question there is what part of your mission are they the most interested in? What part of your projects or endeavors that you have would they find to be the most satisfying to be supporting? A more in-depth donor survey of maybe 4 or 5 questions after 2 or 3 years, and then if possible, a third-party survey via the telephone after someone's been with your organization 3 to 5 years. And one of the main key questions to add into the latter 2 groups there is, would you recommend our charity to a friend? Because when someone comes back to you saying they would recommend that elevates them as to even higher of a major gift prospect for your organization. It also gives you a way to segment future communication. Someone that gives you a very high rating or a high level of satisfaction, for instance, may get a different form of communication than someone that's rating you lower, or it may necessitate a personal contact in some form or another. There was also a very strong correlation between training and fundraising performance. So every one of you that's attending the session today, reach around and give yourself a pat on the back right now, because what we found out of these nearly 700 organizations that participated in this, each additional form of training of at least an hour or more that they participated in resulted in a $37,000 increase in their fundraising revenue the next year. Think about that. So every webinar that you attend, every type of educational session, we'll talk a little bit about some of the options for that, can result in $37,000 more in additional fundraising dollars to support your mission. So this was really exciting. And many of the organizations such as PANO that we're working with have used this as the basis of some of their communication to talk about all their educational opportunities. Of course, being a vendor like we are, Bloomerang, the next correlation was one that we were really excited about. The quality of the IT systems in place is a key driver to the number of major gifts received. We saw a stark difference between people that were trying to track major gift touches and major gift, working with people in a spreadsheet versus a more commercialized CRM or donor management system that allowed them to properly track all of the touches and be aware of exactly what type of engagement that we're getting from those organizations. Another one that shouldn't surprise you, organizations whose boards and volunteers played an active role were more successful major gift fundraising. They weren't necessarily involved in all the touches, but they were very instrumental in making the introductions and inviting people to face-to-face events and virtual events so that you had sort of a top of a funnel flow of new prospects coming in from those board members and volunteers. Next, obviously, the individuals that were engaged in fundraising themselves, the fundraising staff members, the longer the tenure that they had, the more successful the major gift fundraising. Obviously, if your best major gift fundraising prospects are people that have been given to your organization 4 or 5 years or longer, people that have got to know them over that same 4 or 5 year period are going to have a much better chance to move forward with that. So these are our recommendations. We worked very closely with Dr. Sargent and with Amy Eisenstein and said, based upon all of the findings in the report, how can we make these come to life? And I hope all 10 of these recommendations that you're familiar with in some way, shape, or form, but I'm going to guess once again, there's going to be 3 or 4 here that you can glean to make immediate use of in the very near future. Before I jump into the recommendations, Stephen, are there any additional questions that we might want to take at this instant in time?
Not yet. I think you got them. You got their
Good.
attention.
I'm being crystal clear.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, any questions, don't forget to chat them to Stephen so we can take them as we go. Well, the first one is one that Steve and I were both excited to see, that donor retention makes a difference. Well, why is that? Well, the more donors that you have that give 4 or 5 years or longer makes a huge difference in the potential pool of major gift prospects. So some of the key data that you will find here, this is an example I often share when I'm talking about donor retention. If you have a database or a list of donors in some form or another that's 1,000 in size, 1,000 individuals, depending on what your donor retention rate is, your attrition rate is the opposite. So if the average donor retention rate right now in the United States is around 44, 45%. So the attrition rate is close to that 60% there. Look what happens to the number of donors if you're not replenishing them with a bunch of new donors every year. Your 1,000 moves, if you look at the bottom row there, the 1,000 moves to 400 donors at the end of year 1, 160 at the end of year 2, 64 at the end of year 3, 26, and then 10. So it's a stark realization that without adding new donors, a 60% attrition rate equates to only 10 donors just 5 years down the road. So if you're like me, for some reason, on every board that I join, I end up being on the fundraising or the development committee, and usually end up chairing that at some point in time. And very seldom in those first few meetings that I attend do they talk about donor retention. We are always talking about how can we attract new donors, and what event can we hold, and how can we bring new donors into the fold. And people are not really concentrating, because when you look at your donor retention rate, it can tell you a lot. For those of you that are not able to calculate your donor retention rate, it's a very simple mathematical formula. The denominator, the bottom formula that you can see there, is the number of donors in any previous 12-month period. So if we wanted to compare 2018 to 2019, if we said we had 1,000 donors in 2018, the numerator, the upper part that we are dividing into that, is the number of people from 2018 that gave again in the next 12 months. You don't get to count any new donors, even if they come in at the major gift level. So if you had 500 people from the 1,000 that gave again the next year, you would have 500 over 1,000, or a 50% retention rate. And you should really be very, very proud, because you are above the national average in the United States. Because when you take a look at the retention rates, the overall retention rate is composed of first-time donor retention rates and the repeat donor retention rate. So as you can see here, we are only retaining first-time donors at about a 19 or 20% rate. So of those new donors that are coming in, for every 100 of them, we are only retaining 19 or 20. Whereas once someone gives a second time with your organization, we retain them at more than 3 times that same rate, at a 63% retention rate. So it's very, very important to think about, how can we help our first-time donors make the second gift to us. We can also peel back the onion and know that when we look at the stats on this, that 88% of our fundraising dollars at the average nonprofit in the United States comes from 12% of our donors. So if you're going to apply a couple of the suggestions we have for donor retention, make sure you're applying it to that 12 or 15%. That can make such a huge, huge difference for you. So let's talk about the number one way you can impact first-time donor retention and overall donor retention, and that is how you go about doing your thank yous or your acknowledgements. If you're not segmenting them, we would suggest a segmentation even to the basic level of just 4 segments here. The horizontal line is your average gift amount, and the vertical arrows are the difference between new and repeat donors. So the upper left corner or quadrant would be new donors that have given above your average gift amount. The right side would be repeat donors above the average gift amount. And then the same one below is new and repeat for that. And what you want to do is sit down with your team and design a thank you or acknowledgement process of how we're going to touch those individuals over the next 3 to 6 months. Some key concepts to keep in mind is always thank them within the first 48 hours whenever possible. We understand that sometimes at the end of the year that's difficult. Try to be different than the rest. If you've never taken the time to sort of shop the other nonprofits in your community, it's a very good exercise to just make a series of $5 and $10 gifts and see what other nonprofits use for their acknowledgement process, and find out, besides a thank you letter, is there a welcome kit? Is there a follow-up phone call? Is there an offer to talk to somebody, or is there a handwritten note that comes? Any of these items here would be part of your communication plan, and you would set up a communication plan for each of the 4 quadrants. One of the key things that we have found too is that any type of handwritten note or handwritten PS makes a huge difference in the amount of people that read it and take note of it. It also is important to state exactly what the monies are going to be going toward and how the project is doing. So anytime your first-time donors can be focused in on a particular project or a particular aspect of your mission, it builds a closer kinship or a closer bond with that. And then obviously, any type of phone call that can be done in this age of social distancing is very, very important for that. Stephen, I'm going to pause for a second. Are there any questions about those items?
Not yet, but I was wondering, Jay, if you had any personal experience of doing these things, maybe when you were part of those capital campaigns, or you're a major donor yourself. Can you think of a time when maybe someone did this for you? And
Oh, very much so. Anytime that we make a gift to certain organizations, we know that there's going to be more than just a thank you letter that's coming. Something else that's forwarded on to us via email, something that comes in the mail with a post-it note. There's all sorts of examples. A little bit later, toward the end of the presentation, I'm going to be showing you some of the resources that are on the Bloomerang website, and there will be a ton of examples that you can see there of different ways that you can acknowledge people and set up a communication stream that would take place. Alrighty, the second area that when you think about major gifts, a lot of people think about prospect research. What is important to do that? And I thought I would do a little bit of a primer on prospect research, because whether your prospect research is looking somebody up on Google, whether you use a service like our friends at Donor Search, whether you have other ways of doing it, I thought I would list for you the 5 best indicators of a potential major gift prospect. And some of you may be guessing these already, but let's bring up the first one here. Number 1 by far is the amount of previous giving to your nonprofit. People that have been giving to you on consecutive years and multiple years, and you see that their gift level is moving up year after year. Those are by far, by the widest margin, your ideal prospects to be talking to and building a relationship to make a major gift ask. The second most important level, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky, sometimes you need to use services like prospect research identification, giving to other nonprofits. We've all been in that meeting with the development team or the volunteers or the board committee, where they talk about naming every wealthy individual in your community. Well, believe it or not, some of those wealthy families are of a philanthropic nature and are giving to nonprofits already. And some of them, that's really not part of their process at this time. So that's a good one to keep in mind, is the amount of giving that's being done to other nonprofits. The third one is twofold here. If they have a family foundation, please make sure that you're noting that in your database or your spreadsheet. And do they have a donor advised fund? We are seeing a larger and larger portion of the major gifts to every nonprofit in this country coming from donor advised funds. Billions and billions of dollars are moving into those funds as people are taking dollars out of the stock market over the last several weeks. Many of those dollars are moving into donor advised funds and will be put to use in the charitable sector. So please make sure that you're aware of the people that are in your database that either have a family foundation, participate in a foundation in some way, form, or another as a trustee, and third, have a donor advised fund. The next level of indication is people that are very strong in political giving, particularly at the federal level, people that make gifts and donations to federal political campaigns, whether it's presidential, senatorial, etc. Those are usually strong indicators of potential major gift givers to your organization. And the last one, which we often think of as the most common, is real estate ownership or other type of capital assets. Believe it or not, the amount of wealth that someone has accumulated is the fifth best indicator, not the first or second or third, as you can see by those listed here. Stephen, any quick questions on my prospect research indicators?
Yeah, so it seems like, number one, you can get that from your database, and then 2 through 5, that sort of requires some additional wealth screening software. Is that usually the case?
Well, the 3, 4, and 5 doesn't necessarily, but the giving to other nonprofits is probably the trickiest one to get.
Okay.
And it does usually require some sort of wealth identification software. We see the ability to pull this types of information available. I know they were part of the sponsorship of this report, but our friends at Donor Search do that in conjunction with us at Bloomerang for as little as $15 a month. And it seems to be one whale of a nice investment to be able to identify this for all of your constituents. Any other questions there, Stephen?
I don't think so.
Okay. Let's move on to donor communications. And I'm going to keep this very simple today. We work very closely with a dear friend and a colleague by the name of Tom Ahern, who's sort of the donor communication specialist, particularly in written communications. And I said to Tom, if we were to pass on help to organizations, what would that be? And we came up with something we refer to as the Ahern audit, which is basically looking at 2 factors for all of your communications that can make a big difference, particularly as you arrange all of your touch points with your potential major donors here. The first one is to make sure that your communications are written at a certain grade reading level. Believe it or not, your best donor communications are written at the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade level. So you want to make sure you test for that with any of your communications, whether it's a newsletter article, a thank you letter, an appeal letter, any type of communications that's occurring. Try to keep it written at that level, which means it's not very good to pass around communications to be viewed by a committee or by your executive director, because that will usually move the grade reading level up above those levels where it's not quite as effective. The second one is what we call the U test. And as you can see in this case, someone passed both of these. They had twice as many of the pronouns in their communication that were focused in on the donor versus the person writing the communication or the nonprofit organization itself. So it's a very simple test. All you have to do is go through and count your pronouns on any communications that you're about to do and see if we have twice as many for the donor or the prospective donor than we do about ourselves. We test this in our Bloomerang application. So this is an example of someone that did not pass either one of those, but that's a quick and easy way to help make your communications more effective. Training. Well, obviously in this day and age, the online training and the webinars have become even more important. Back when we did the research 3 years ago, we could see that the online training and webinars comprised over 56% of the training that professional fundraisers were doing. And then you can see the breakdown by the other types, with mentoring being very important. And in this day and age of social distancing, the mentoring can still be done. It just has to be done in some other way other than face-to-face. I usually, in face-to-face presentations, ask a little bit about what experience people have had, but is there anybody out there right now that could chat any type of training that you've done in the last 6 months or so that was been particularly effective for you? And Stephen, if one or two of those come up, feel free to share with the group here while we're talking about that.
Okay.
I'm going to talk a little bit about some professional online training that we refer to as the fundraising standard in just a minute. I'll give some people the details on that, but I'm not going to jump into that right now. Anything pop up, Stephen?
Not yet, but I'll let you know if they do.
Okay, well, keep this in mind. While many of you are working from home, this is an ideal time to supplement your fundraising knowledge and your fundraising education via some of these online mechanisms and tools. Obviously, as you move on into full-fledged education, one of the things that we find very useful is the CFRE certification, or the other types of educations that come into play. Obviously, conferences are not going to be a big part, but degree programs, and many of those are available online, will allow you to have undergraduate degrees in philanthropy and professional fundraising, as well as master's programs and beyond for that. So you'll see the breakdown in the Major Gift Research Report of some of the educational opportunities that people had taken advantage of and how those were broken out. One of the most important areas is making sure that we have a donor-centered culture. That means that everybody in the organization, from the fulfillment of the mission to people that are engaged in marketing and communications, perhaps outside the fundraising realm, to people that are at the executive level, that everybody realizes that much of our funding from many nonprofits centers around the relationship that we have with donors and prospective donors. A key one that comes into mind is your volunteer coordinator. And if you're using volunteers in some form or manner, are they introduced to the mission of your organization? How does that come to life? One of the ways that we have found this to be very useful for the organizations that I've been on the board of is to have various members of the rest of the organization, of the nonprofit, attend development or fundraising team meetings. And we often, if they're attending those team meetings, a couple key things to cover during those meetings is what are we going to do this week to address helping with major gifts more, and what will we be doing next week? So if people can be attending those, they'll get a feel for how the major gifts fundraising and the touch points are happening, but overall getting a little bit better feel for how they can have a donor-centered culture as a whole within your organizations. And so there's when we look at some of the resources that we bring to bear for at our Bloomerang website, you'll see once again various examples of a donor-centered culture coming into life. IT systems, as I said, if you can focus in on your data management, there's some ways that we can really help with making the focus in on major gifts come to life. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my favorite way of helping that. And I use one of my favorite Peanuts characters. We've got Linus sitting here holding on to his blanket. I always use that as the appropriate metaphor here. And the question I wanted to ask all of you that are attending here today, can you have too many names in your database? Could that be a hindrance to our major gift work? And could that actually be inhibiting the results that we could have with major gifts? One of the ways that we can do this is to take a look at your current databases and do what I call the 0, 10, 90 rule. We're basically going to go through your database with a query or a filter or some sort of report and figure out what names in your database, and these can be corporations and foundations as well as individuals, comprise, and you can look over a 12-month period or a 24-month period, over the last 12 or 24 months, what names in your database of one form or another provided 0% of your funding, what portion of that group provided 10% of your funding, and then that all-important group, what names and constituents in your database provided 90% of your funding. Once you divided your database into 3 groups, you can then decide what to do with each segment. And this would be the recommendations that we would do. For those that are providing 0% of your funding, you want to take a look at moving them offline, except for these 5 exceptions there. Anybody that's been a donor to you at or above your average gift level. For the typical nonprofit in our country, the average gift level is usually somewhere between $75 and $200. So let's just say it's $125, for example. Anybody that's ever made a gift of $125 or more, I would keep them in your system. Obviously, previous board members and committee members and etc. would be there. Anybody that's been a volunteer for a longer period of time, all of your top volunteers, even if they haven't donated in the last few years, you would want to make sure and keep them there. If you're an educational institution or a group that has classes in one form or another, it's very important to keep your alumni there. And then for the rest of the group, we would urge you to do some sort of a 1 or 2 part survey where you ask them specifically through either a written communication or an electronic communication, would they like to continue to receive communications from your organization? A very simple survey to find out if they would be partial to doing that. Anybody that falls into answering positively to that survey, and I would do one and then wait another 3 months and do a second one, plus the previous 4 would stay in your database. The group that comprises 10%, you would continue communicating them, of course, but in an automated manner, and then focus the majority of your time and your volunteer time in on that group that's been providing 90% of your funding. Now, you'll notice in that 10% group, I say handle automatically, but research. If we can apply those 5 prospect research indicators to that group, there may be some that should slip into that 90% group and be eligible for additional touches by you or your staff or your volunteers. Any questions on this section, Stephen, before we move on?
Yeah, can you kind of pull on automatic, Jay? There's a question wondering kind of what you mean by that.
Yeah. Obviously, if you're already doing an annual report, you want to send that out to people, this would be the group that would receive that. If you're doing some sort of a quarterly or semi-annual newsletter, you would communicate with them. Obviously, if you're doing, let's say, 3 or 4 direct mail appeals every year, you would be doing that. Obviously, they would receive every special event invitation or special event email. What you're going to be doing there is, we know that these are loyal donors. Some of them may be eligible for additional touches, but for the most part, we just want to make sure that we keep them in the fold and we're doing the proper acknowledgments and follow up with them. But it's going to be done in a fairly automatic manner. You're not going to take someone that makes a $25 gift every year and ask your executive director to make a personal phone call to that person. But you probably should ask your executive director to make a lot of personal phone calls to individuals and companies and foundations that fall into the bottom group. Does that help clarify some, Stephen, on that?
Yeah, I think so.
Any other additional questions? Because when we're in face-to-face groups, I always see a lot of hands go up when we talk about this 0-10-90 rule.
Yeah, I think we're okay for now.
Okay. Volunteers. I know this is going to be difficult over the next few weeks and months, but make sure that you explain your mission and try to engage your volunteers. A volunteer today is often a donor tomorrow, is often a legacy or major gift donor down the road in certain cases. Your board, it's very important that we keep the board as engaged as possible for that. And even though we know most board members don't actively engage in the fundraising process, They are absolutely astute in helping us get introductions to key people that we would like to meet and can be part of that. Remember, board engagement can be with people thanking and acknowledging your donors. Use board members their first 1 or 2 years on the board to do nothing but be involved in the acknowledgement and thank you process, not in the solicitation process. We need to break board members in very easily so that they become comfortable. In fact, my rule of thumb is have them continually be involved in the acknowledgement and thank you process till they ask to be involved in the solicitation or introduction processes. And then finally, I'm going to wrap up here with some of the most important metrics that were part of this survey. Some of the things that you can track on a monthly or quarterly basis here. The number of new gifts that come in that are above a certain dollar amount. The number of legacy related gifts. It's important to know how many actual solicitations or proposals that you've made. Your success rate in your solicitations. Are we batting 50% on our proposals that we make? Is it higher or is it lower? The meetings that are attended by prospects. Obviously, your donor satisfaction rankings, if you're doing some sort of surveys. And I think most importantly, the number of personalized gift proposals that are made. As you enter into the major gift world, there will be more and more personalized proposals that will be made electronically or through the mail that will come into play. So can small and mid-sized nonprofits really raise major gifts? We came to a resounding yes by the results of this survey. As I said again, you can pull down the entire report, take a look at it electronically from the URL that you see listed there. I alluded to this earlier. About a year ago, we kicked off what we call the Fundraising Standard, which is an online 8-week course that comprises these weeks here that allow you to reach 50% of your CFRE credits as part of the Fundraising Standard. It's a course that costs less than $500 to attend for the full 8 weeks. You're moderated with tutors. It requires anywhere from 3 to 5 hours a week of time to go through the course and achieve 50% of the hours that you need for the CFRE certification. The URL for that, it's pretty easy. It's fundraisingstandard.org. There's also information that you can see listed on the Bloomerang website too. Speaking of the Bloomerang website, we have all sorts of educational resources there. There's a daily blog post, a weekly webinar that we do. In fact, we've been doing almost daily webinars. Stephen, anything you want to say or refer people to regarding that?
Yeah, we have been doing them almost once a day. Also totally free, and we're just trying to focus on kind of the current situation that we find ourselves in with the coronavirus. So check that out. We've even got a session this afternoon, I think at 2 p.m. Eastern, on maintaining your monthly giving program, which will be really good. So if people haven't had their fill of webinars yet, they can jump right back on with us at 2 p.m. today.
Excellent. Last but not least, I want to open it up for any additional questions that we have. One of the things that Stephen helped me quite a bit with, I had the privilege of writing a book about 2 years ago on donor retention. And whenever I'm presenting, we always give an opportunity for anybody to get a copy of the book. So if you would let us know for that, you can receive your copy of the book there. That is my email address there, j.love@bloomerang.co. If we do not get to your question here in the Q&A period, or if you would like to have a copy of the book there, I presume, Stephen or Christina, are the slides going to be made available through PANO?
Yeah, we'll get them to PANO somehow. We'll make that happen.
So we can do that. So anyway, we've got 5 or 10 minutes left here in our hour. Any additional questions that anybody might have regarding major gifts for small organizations that we can help answer?
Jay, I thought I'd kick it off. I had a question for you, if you don't mind.
Certainly.
Can you speak a little bit to the importance of staff retention and longevity? Because I know you mentioned in the beginning that this is kind of a long-term play. It may take several years. And if your maybe head of fundraising is turning over every 2 years or so, which is the average, it seems like that makes it even more difficult to build the relationships.
Ironically, the 2-year time period that you mentioned really is spelled out very nicely in some of the more detailed charts and graphs in the Mastering Major Gift reports there. And what we see, there was a stark difference for organizations that their head of fundraising or key positions on the fundraising team have been there beyond a 2-year period. You can see the results in the dollars being raised in major gifts significantly impacted by the longevity there versus organizations where the chief fundraiser or members of the fundraising team have been there less than 2 years. So it really is a very strict correlation that comes into play there. And I just hope that all of you are finding fulfillment in a position in an organization that you can make a longer term career with, because the amount of major gift dollars that will be raised when you build those 2 to 5 year relationships with donors will be significantly higher.
And it seems like there's also a connection to the IT systems. I remember hearing you tell a story once where a major gift officer asked you and your wife out to dinner, and you had already been giving many, many thousands of dollars to the organization, but that new officer thought you were new to the organization because maybe there wasn't that record keeping, or they didn't review the records, or whatever happened.
Yeah, this was actually an educational institution, and that has signed major gift officers. And what Stephen's alluding to, we were asked to a very nice dinner, my wife and I, and we spent 2 or 3 hours discussing how we met each other and all the different things, and really shared a lot of information that would have been very, very useful for them soliciting major gifts for us from now through the rest of our lifetime. For that. In fact, that individual is so good that they now head up fundraising at another major educational institution. And the new person that approached us, thank goodness, only asked, when they asked us, I was the only one able to attend, and it was a lunch meeting. And they started asking me the exact same questions that had been asked before. And about 15 minutes in, as Stephen knows what I'm about to say here, I stood up and leaned over the table and I said, do you know what I do for a living? And is this as embarrassing for you as it is for me? And I literally left the restaurant because I just did not want to go through answering the same questions for that. And that institution had the president of their institution reach out to me and ask me to another meal, and we talked through all that. I don't think that will ever happen again at their institution. So your record keeping and the ability to keep all of the answers and all of the details from your conversations, from your emails, from your letters, it is so, so important to build sort of a resume or build a reservoir of knowledge about your donors and about their families, so that you have something to refer back to as you help them with any of your more personalized proposals for major gifts.
Jay, maybe a good way to end it would be, what can folks do today to maybe kick this process off if maybe they haven't really been doing anything, or if maybe things have slowed down? What's a major gift exercise they could do today that'll really help them?
One of the things that they can do, if you don't really feel like you've got a portfolio or a list of major gift prospects, is to go through your files, your database, your spreadsheet, whatever the case may be, and let's take a look at, do we have individuals there that have been giving to our organization 3 years or longer consecutively, and have their gifts moved up in value? And if so, those should be the targeted individuals that we do some additional research on to see, are they major gift prospects, and are they perhaps legacy giving prospects for our organization? And if you can come up with a group of 10 to 20 to 30 of those that you can be working with, I guarantee you your major gift results later in 2020 and then 2021 and 2022, you will be much, much happier with, if you can start to begin to realize, this is my targeted group of individuals that I need to be building a stronger relationship with.
Terry just chimed in here, Jay, asking if it's appropriate for board members and anyone meeting with a donor to maybe have access to the database. Do you think they should all be in there, not just the one database person or one fundraising person?
That's up to you. I usually find that if being able to print out or to cut and paste information that would be appropriate versus giving them full access to the database. The only reason I say that, there are still fundraising donor databases and CRM systems that are based upon the pricings, based upon the number of users. So I don't want to say carte blanche that you should give it to everybody. Plus, we find that unless someone is, for instance, your chairman of your board or chair of your fundraising and development committee, they're only going to be working with a few potential major donors. So total access may not be necessary. So I find that just sharing the appropriate details might fulfill the need there. But anybody that's asked to do that, that's a great sign. And perhaps that's your future incoming board chair talking to you right then and there.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty sharp person.
Excellent. All righty. Well, Christina, anything else that you would like to say as we wrap up our hour here together today?
Just want to thank you guys again for hosting this. I think this was a lot of good information. And hopefully this is coming at a really good time for people.
Well, thank you. Well, good. Well, as you can still see up on the screen there, that's my email address. If you would like to ask additional questions, I try to answer each and every one. May not get to it this afternoon. I got a sort of a packed afternoon with some other activities, but if you can let us know, and if you'd like a copy of the book or any other information, please do so. But Christina, and to all PANO, thank you so much for allowing me to have an hour of your day today.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.